Our bodies are the vehicle that take us through this lifetime. Making sure that our body stays lean, mobile, and limber will be key if we wish to participate in the centenarian Olympics. So in today's video, we are going to go over 3 different exercises to unlock your body and build a structure that will stand the test of time. Real quick, before we jump into the content today, if you're new around here, my name is Mark, and this is a channel that is dedicated to lifestyle optimization. It's a place where we distill the latest approaches between the mind and the body, with the ultimate goal of acquiring self-mastery. If that's something you're into, then consider subscribing. So the first exercise we're going to jump into is the hip rockers. Yes, the hip rockers. We aren't going to be rocking out with our hips here, but we are going to try to increase functional ranges of motion, as well as just provide more mobility and tension in through the hips, so that it's going to help us through different stages of movement. So what we're going to do here is simply just come down into a lunge rested position with one knee behind me and one foot in front. And this is kind of your classic hip flexor stretch position. Now, in the context of this position, we are going to do it a little bit differently than what you might conventionally be used to, in the sense that we are not just going to passively squeeze muscles and then hope that tissues start to open up. Rather, we are going to try to activate a subset of muscles in the body and then take it through a very gentle and small range of motion. So for the first phase of this, all we're going to do is start with a little bit of weight on our back foot. And all I'm simply going to do is just transfer weight to my lead leg as I gently extend my hips forward. So as you can see here, I'm just starting with a little bit of weight on that back foot. I'm thinking about pushing that back foot backwards, and then that is slowly taking me into a weight transfer on my front leg. Now what we're doing here is we're taking the tissues through their entire range of motion. So instead of just passively sitting at an end range, for example, like you would do in a conventional hip flexor stretch, we're actually starting to take it from its most short phase to the most lengthened phase that we can sustain tension under. This is going to be a lot more optimal for the tissues and the small muscle groups around the pelvis, as it is going to mimic more of what we would find ourselves doing on a day-to-day basis, especially with a motion that we find ourselves doing often, such as walking. So to start with here, work through about 8 to 10 repetitions on either side, just kind of getting the tissue warm and just kind of getting it used to that range of motion. This shouldn't be really uncomfortable to go through. You shouldn't feel any type of burning or any type of weird sensation. If you are, then it's likely that you're going to too far of a range of motion than what your hips or really your structure is capable of. If you wanted to build on this exercise, you certainly can do that just by adding a little bit of rotation through the upper body. This is going to build on that short and lengthening cycle through the hips, because now we're starting to incorporate that mechanism in through the upper body as well. So what I like to imagine here is I'm essentially just working kind of like a boxing cross, essentially from one side to the other. And I'm just trying to breathe into the one side that I'm getting length out of. So if, for example, my right leg is behind me, as I come forward and I take that right arm across my body, all I'm doing is just trying to create a little bit of length into that right side, but not going so far where I'm breaking from the tension that I created in the ground to begin with. That is something that is going to be crucial, and I'm going to encourage you to be mindful of just having a subtle base of tension just really throughout your entire structure as you're going through this. For this next exercise, we are just going to build on this positioning just by linking the shoulders a little bit more to it, just by working a little bit of a overhead motion. So the positioning itself is going to be pretty much the exact same. The tension in the floor is going to be the same, the tension in through the pelvis, the upper body. Really the only thing that we're going to try to add on to this is what our shoulders are doing. So what I'm going to do with my shoulders is simply start in a bicep curl position, and I'm gonna have my shoulder just under a very light amount of tension. So how we're gonna do this is by simply squeezing a little bit of tension into my bicep, into this muscle on the front side of my shoulder here called the serratus, And then as a byproduct of that, we should get a little bit of lat tension as well. This is gonna provide the baseline of tension that our shoulders should have. And what we're gonna begin to do is simply start to reach overhead as I bring my hips forward and rotate my arm inward. Once I get to my end range of position, I'm gonna gently start to sit my hips back. My arm's gonna come back to that bicep curl position, and I'm right back to where I started. Once I am back in this reset phase, again, I'm gonna start the motion from the ground. I'm gonna gently start to extend my hips forward, and then I'm just reaching my arm overhead at the same time that all of this is happening. Now, what this is doing is it's starting to link multiple lines of tension in our body, but also multiple joints together. So instead of just taking a single joint, say just the shoulder joint through a range of motion, or just my hips through a range of motion, we want to think about how we can integrate those different mechanisms together on a more integrated and holistic level. If you execute this well, you should feel everything from your hips almost all the way to your fingertips just get the slightest amount of length. We're not going for extreme amounts of length through a very big range of motion here. For now, the smaller the range of motion with adequate or proper tension is what I would suggest starting with. As you start to feel out that length and you start to notice the coordination of the exercise just happen with a little bit more ease, then you can start to increase the range of motion, and therefore you should get a little bit more length out of the motion. Now for this last exercise, all we're gonna do is combine the first two exercises with one of my favorite tools, which is the kettlebell. So now that we have given our body a subset of programming to understand and recognize, now we can actually start to make the motion a little bit more dynamic, but more importantly, more rhythmic. The tissues in the body not only need to understand how to go through this shortening and this lengthening cycle from a conscious level, but they also need to understand how to do that in a more ballistic or rhythmic fashion. And ideally under a load that is going to mimic the physics that we're constantly surrounded by. And what I mean by this is simply the force of gravity. The better our body understands the force of gravity and can understand how to rhythmically lengthen and contract under it, ultimately the more functional and sustainable our structure is going to be. So all we're gonna do here is get back into that exact same position. I'm gonna put a kettlebell into my hand, and all I want you to start with is just a rocking motion with your arm. So think about the tension that we were just talking about with the shoulder, having a little bit of that in through the shoulder itself, and then you're just gonna gently start to squeeze the kettlebell and just kind of go back and forth with the whole arm here. Once you start to get used to kind of the tension in through the shoulder, the rhythm of the kettlebell going back and forth, then we can start to link this entire motion together. So what this is gonna look like is the kettlebell is gonna go back. I'm gonna have a little bit of weight on that back foot. And then in one motion, the kettlebell is gonna sweep forward, going into the overhead position as my hips go through extension. Once I get to that end range, all I'm gonna do is just receive the motion of the kettlebell back down, kind of absorbing the rhythm back into my body, and then utilizing that force to take me back through that range of motion. This is going to be a great way to open up the shoulders, open up aspects of the rib cage, and definitely a great way to open up the pelvis. I would suggest working through this for about 15 to 20 repetitions, but I want to highlight that I would encourage you to focus on the quality of the repetition rather than just going through it for the sake of going through it. If you can get 5 or 8 high quality reps in and you feel that is enough for your body, then stick with that, and then you can start to increase the load and the volume. So when it comes to training or any type of exercise, even what we went through today, I think it's important to keep in mind the half-life of your practice. I think nowadays it's easier than ever to get caught up in the latest trends and just kind of hop from one thing to the next. But typically those trends don't take into account the future. And what I have found in my own experience is they're typically at the cost of tomorrow. So if longevity is your priority, then I would encourage you to be deliberate about your today. For that is going to be what determines the outcome of your future tomorrows. If you enjoyed today's video, then be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. On this channel, we go through everything from different movement practices, such as what we went through today. We also go through different mindset practices to make sure that we are not only working our body, but also our mind. And we have the ultimate goal of getting ourselves to a place of self-mastery. If any of those or all of them are something you're into, then I look forward to seeing you around in future videos. Until then, make sure you are prioritizing and then you are optimizing for you. I will catch you in the next one. Peace.